Okay, let's look now at the bony portions of the appendages, the upper extremity as well as the lower extremity. When we look at the shoulder girdle as well as the rest of it, but we always have to ask us about the function. I mean, we have a structure that dictates function, but when we look about what we need in the upper extremities, we need to be able to reach above the head far. We need flexibility, but also we need to be able to lift heavy things, and so we need strength in it as well. So we need both of those two things, flexibility and strength. And so that's how the shoulder girdle sort of is designed. It's very flexible, but it is remarkably strong. It actually has only one bony connection to the shoulder girdle has only one bony connection to the axial skeleton, and that's right here, where the clavicle, the collarbone comes in to the breastbone. The rest is all muscles, and so that's pretty interesting. So when we look at the first two bones here, we have the clavicle, the collarbone, and then the shoulder blade, the scapula. Those are the beginning points of this upper extremity. Those are the bones that compose the shoulder girdle. And then what you can see here is the upper arm bone, and that's the humerus. So let's go into the scapula. So when we look at the scapula, it's situated here in the back. You can see from the back the red parts, the shoulder blade parts. We can see it right here. That's a picture of it. There's multiple pictures. This is a nice one because it shows us the different motions that the shoulder blade does. It moves upward, it moves downward, it can go towards one another, separate more. It rounds upwards, depending if you reach it, rounds upwards. So that's very, very flexible. So that's very interesting. Here we can also see all the muscles that attach the shoulder blade. We'll talk about the muscles next. And so we can see how these muscles here attach the shoulder blade to the back of the trunk. Up in this section we have these muscles. We'll talk about the names of them later. But then we also have the underneath the shoulder blade here. Underneath we also have muscles that attach the scapula, the shoulder blade, from underneath onto the rib cage. That's also interesting. And then look at that in the front. That's the scapula to the front of the ribs connection as well. So that's a very interesting way to connect the upper extremities to the trunk of the body. And then here we have muscle, and this is actually another nice picture of the muscle that that attaches the shoulder blades to the anterior portion of the rib cage. See, here's the sternum, it's the anterior portion. And then we have some interesting muscles that hold the arm into the shoulder girdle, and that is mostly attached to the scapula, a little bit to the clavicle as well. But we have these muscles here. We have three in the back that come into the back, and then from the arm to the shoulder blade, the scapula, and then we have one that reaches into the front. And so those are actually our rotator cuff muscles. We'll talk about those again later once we get to this chapter more in detail. But then we also have a muscle that brings the arm and attaches it from the outside onto the shoulder blade and onto the collarbone, the clavicle a little bit. So those are sort of these bigger picture connections. When we now go and talk about the scapula's landmarks, we have to describe these things that then we can discuss the muscle attachments after that. So most of these things that we talk about here are going to be muscle attachments. Some of them make joints. So when we look at the shoulder blade from the back, this is from the back. This is the outside. So this arm goes right into here, reaches right into here. We see one big structure that stands out is this spine, this ridge-looking thing that goes across towards a little down inward towards the spine, towards the midline of the body, which will be here. That's the spine of the scapula. And then the other thing is we have borders, because the scapula is sort of like a triangle shaped thing, like here. So we have a medial border. That's the border that goes medially. That's towards the spine of the body. We have a lateral border that reaches into the armpit. And then we also actually have a superior border, it's just not indicated here. And then we have corners. We have a superior angle here. That makes a pretty right angle almost. And then we have an acuter angle here at the bottom. It's the inferior angle. And we do also, you could see that right here, inferior angle. That's the front view. We'll go to that next. And then we also have a lateral angle here. The spine of the scapula we can reach towards the edge of the shoulder, which is actually right here. That's the shoulder proper. And that's known as the acromion. So that round structure is the acromion, and then on the other side here we can have a clavicle, the collarbone that's attached and moves forward. And in the front here we have this little process that sticks out, that goes forward and sticks forward. And that's known as the coracoid process. And of course, typically stuff, anatomy stuff, it's complicated. So you got to make mnemonic, so you got to make some goofy stuff. And so I always think that the crow in a witch sits on top of the coracoid process and says, coracoid, coracoid. And so that's sort of how I remember that in my own head. Above the spine, there is a fossa. There is a sort of an indentation area, and we have one that's below the spine. The one above the spine, we call that the supraspinous fossa, and that's going to be a muscle attachment in the next chapter, or couple down. The supra means above, so the supraspinous fossa is a valley sort of bony thing for muscle to attach that's above the spine of the scapula, and the infraspinous fossa is below the spine of the scapula. And then we got one more term here, and that's the glenoid cavity at the lateral angle. And the glenoid cavity is a flat sort of structure that is actually the bony part of the joint with the upper arm into the scapula. Around the glenoid cavity we have ligaments. We have a labrum, they call that. I don't know if we can see that here. What we actually see here, this is actually the glenoid cavity right here. And around that cavity in the living part, we have a cartilage that makes a cup and then encloses the humerus, the top part of the humerus. Good. So now we flip that scapula over and we look from the front. So here you see the acromion, you see the coracoid process, you see the glenoid cavity better, you see this whole surface here. Laterally border, we can also call the lateral border the axillary border if you'd like. And we can also call the medial border the vertebral border if we'd like. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make it complicated, but I want to give you the terms that are used in textbooks, and so therefore, you understand what you're looking at when you read it. And then the whole underneath side of the scapula that actually touches the ribs is known as the subscapular fossa. And we have a muscle that comes in here and attaches to that subscapular fossa. We also have muscles then that attach here and reach underneath to the front of the rib and attach the whole upper arm, the shoulder, the whole arm actually, onto the rib cage. And then some that attach on the outer side and bring it into the back and attach the scapula from the back side. So it's going to be a very muscularly anchored piece of bone. Very interesting. And from there we go into the arm, into the upper arm bone, and that's known as the humerus. And whenever you have a place that's roundy, it's usually called a head. So here's called the head of the humerus. And then look at that. We have a round thing known as the anatomical neck. Right here. Underneath the humerus. Well, underneath the head. No, not underneath the humerus. Underneath the head, like in a human being, you usually have a neck. And so on the humerus, we actually have two necks. We have a neck that's right. Let me show you here. This one. We have a neck that's right underneath the head that goes around. That's pretty thick. But then we have another neck that's past some bumps. And that's known as a surgical neck. So the first is the anatomical neck. The second is the surgical neck. Because when the humerus breaks, it usually breaks there in the surgical neck, not in the anatomical neck. Then we have these two bumps, This is a front view. So we have a bump that comes right to the side, and that's known as the greater tubercle. The muscles, a lot of the muscles, but the three main muscles that attach here are the ones that go into the back of the scapula and attach the humerus onto the scapula. They're part of the rotator cuff muscles, or when you hear frozen shoulder stuff, those are involved with that. And then that's the greater tubercle. And tubercle is a little bump that has muscle attachments. We also have the term trochanter, Trochanter, and that refers to bigger bumps that also have muscle attachments. We get them in the lower extremities. And then we have a lesser trochanter, a smaller one, and that's more in the front, and that's where another muscle is attached that reaches into the anterior part, the front part of the shoulder blade, the scapula, to anchor that humerus firmly into the front and the back of that scapula. And then we have a place in between those bumps, and that's known as the inter means in between, intertubercular sulcus, or some books call it the intertubercular groove. And then a little further down on the shaft of the humerus, we have a roughened area, and that's known as the deltoid tuberosity. That's on the outside. That's going to be a muscle attachment of the deltoid muscle, which is one that brings the arm and anchors it in and around the shoulder blade and the clavicle in the front. So that's going to be a muscle that helps with that, and also of course moves the arm. As we go distally, further away from the attachment, we go towards the elbow, and we have a few places here. We have in the front, this is from the front, we have a round thing here. It's almost like looks ahead, and then we got sort of a pulley thing here, T thing. No, not T. It's kind of an edge thing here. Has a weird angle to it. So those are the joint surfaces that make the joints with the forearm bones. The round one will attach with the one forearm bone and the radius, and that's known as the capitulum. The capit means head. And so maybe you can remember it because capit means head, and this is totally round. And then the other one is called trochlea. And so those make joints. Those are actually, never mind. And then we have this fossa here. I'm not going to worry about this coronoid fossa. More of that terminology is just too much. But then we have a radial fossa, same thing. But then we have an area like here that like stands out. It's actually a kind of sensitive area when you touch it. It's because there's not the bone's right there, and that's the medial epicondyle, and that will become important for muscle attachments as well. Of course, like all of these bumpy things. And then we have a bump on the outside, also, and that's the lateral epicondyle, and those are all muscle attachments. And then another one that I do want you to memorize is this indentation in the back, and that's known as the olecranon fossa. Olecranon fossa. And this is actually then where the forearm bone, the ulna, will anchor into this part here. That's why you cannot extend the elbow past 90 degrees. You can't bend it backwards. Look here, see? This is the olecranon fossa back in here, and then this part of the ulna, this part is going to be the ulna here, this bone. This is the elbow proper, really, this part here, but it anchors into the fossa, and so that when that straightens out, that will bang into bone. You cannot go further than that. Well, you could break it, but we don't want to do that. This is the elbow from the back, so that's going to be then the next bone downward. That's the ulna. And here on the outside is the radius, and you can see how that attachment of the radius to the humerus is sort of is round. This is round. Look at here, you can even see more how round it is, and so that will fit nicely into the capitulum. And there's actually a ligament around here, because when you see the radius, you can sort of see it made out here. There's a head, and then there's a neck, and around the neck there's a ligament that holds it together with the ulna, this bone. This is from the front. So this bone is the ulna here. We'll go to those in a minute. Just want to briefly give you an understanding of how complicated it looks when we then put muscle on top.